The tunnel collapsed before sunrise, and the sound rolled through the mountain like heavy drums, and the workers froze as dust rose and stones slammed down, and the narrow passage disappeared behind a wall of broken rock and twisted beams. Inside that darkness Ron lay pinned in a tight pocket of space, and he could barely move his legs, and his chest felt squeezed by the weight above him, and the air tasted like dirt and metal and fear. Ron had been a billionaire for years, and people usually spoke to him carefully, and smiled too fast, and called him sir, but none of that mattered now because money could not push away stone and power could not pull air into his lungs. He tried to stay calm, and counted his breaths in his mind, and listened for any sound that meant help was near, but all he heard at first was the slow settling of rubble, and the quiet drip of water somewhere deeper in the tunnel. His phone had no signal, and the screen light was fading, and he thought about how strange it was that the world could know his name while the mountain did not care about his name at all. He remembered the last meeting he attended, and the last message he ignored, and the last time he promised himself he would slow down, and he felt a sharp regret, because he had rushed through life, as if time could be bought like anything else. Outside the tunnel the worksite turned into a storm of shouting voices and flashing lights and people running in circles with radios and helmets and rescue kits, and the air was thick with dust that clung to hair and clothes. A foreman tried to organize the crowd and asked everyone to step back because the tunnel was unstable and another collapse could happen, and the heavy machines could not be placed too close without shaking the ground. Some workers grabbed tools and began moving smaller rocks, but the wall was dense and packed, and each time someone pried at the edge more gravel slipped down and made the opening tighter and more dangerous. Among the workers stood Tom, a single dad with tired eyes and strong hands, and a jacket that smelled of oil from the garage where he worked long nights fixing engines for delivery trucks. Tom had come to the mountain for a small repair job, and he hoped the extra pay would cover rent and groceries and a warm pair of shoes for his son Ben, who had been growing too fast for the old ones. When the collapse happened, Tom felt his stomach drop, and he saw fear on faces that usually looked tough, and he heard someone say a man was inside, and for a moment the whole group seemed to hold one breath together. Tom did not know who was trapped, and he did not ask because the name did not matter to him, and his mind went straight to Ben, and to the promise Tom always carried inside him that a person should not be left alone in the dark if there was a way to help. He grabbed a shovel and a short metal bar and moved toward the rubble, and a few people called after him to stop because it was risky, and the foreman warned him that trained rescuers were on the way. Tom kept going, and he started at the edge where loose stones could be moved without shaking the deeper wall, and he worked slowly, at first testing each rock and pulling it free with controlled strength. Dust covered his face and coated his tongue, and his hands began to sting as sharp edges scraped his skin, but he kept clearing a path one stone at a time, as if he were building a door back into the earth. Inside the tunnel Ron heard the faint scrape of stone and metal, and the sound was weak but steady, and it felt like a rope thrown across deep water, and he pressed his ear toward it, and called out with a voice that shook. His words came out dry, and he had to pause between breaths, and he did not try to sound important, because there was no room for pride, and he simply tried to be heard. Tom heard a muffled voice from somewhere beyond the wall, and the sound made his heart push harder, and he leaned closer and answered in a calm tone so the trapped man would not panic, and he promised he was there, and he promised he would keep digging. The rescue team arrived with helmets and lights and medical kits, and they assessed the rubble and marked unstable spots and measured gaps and talked about angles and weight and the risk of more falling rock. They asked Tom to step aside, and he did for a moment because he respected their training, but he stayed close and watched every move, and when the team paused to wait for equipment, Tom picked up his shovel again and worked where they told him it was safe. Hours passed, and the sky above the mountain turned from dark to gray, and the cold air bit into everyone's fingers, and the lights from the trucks made long shadows that looked like thin walls on the ground. Tom's arms grew heavy, but he continued, and he used the metal bar to loosen stones and then pulled them out by hand, and he placed each one to the side carefully so the pile would not slide back. He kept thinking of Ben at home and how Ben would ask why his father was late, and how Tom would want to answer with a story that taught kindness instead of fear. Inside the tunnel Ron tried to stay awake, and he pictured Ben even though he had never met Ben, and he imagined a small child sleeping safely, and he wondered how many times he had walked past people like Tom without truly seeing them. He felt shame for the way he had built walls around himself, and he remembered the nights he ate alone in bright rooms and the mornings he looked at charts instead of people, and he understood that he had been rich in numbers and poor in warmth. Tom finally opened a narrow gap, and a thin line of air moved through it, and Ron felt that change like a new season, and he pressed his face toward the opening, and the fresh air made him cough, but it also made him believe he might survive. Tom spoke again in a steady voice and asked Ron to tell him where the pain was, and Ron described the pressure on his legs and the tightness in his chest, and Tom listened carefully, as if he were a medic, even though he was only a mechanic. The rescue team expanded the gap slowly and inserted a small light, and the beam cut through dust and showed a trapped figure lying in a cramped space, and the workers outside grew quiet because they could see the reality now. Someone recognized Ron and whispered his name, and a few faces changed as if money had suddenly appeared in the dust, but Tom did not change at all because he had not dug for a name, and he had dug for a life. As dawn brightened the mountain, the team prepared to stabilize the rubble with supports, and Tom stayed beside them holding tools and passing equipment, and keeping his focus on Ron's breathing and voice. Ron looked through the narrow opening and saw Tom's face covered in dust and sweat, and he saw blood on Tom's knuckles, and he felt something break inside him that was not rock but pride and distance and cold habit. Ron tried to speak, and his voice trembled, and he said he thought this was his end, and Tom answered with a simple calm sentence that said it was not the end, and that they would keep working until the tunnel gave him back. The sun rose higher, and the mountain air turned a little warmer, and the rescue team continued with careful steps, and Tom stayed with them, refusing to leave, because in his mind leaving was the same as giving up. Under the collapsed tunnel a billionaire held on to life, and above it a single dad dug on with the steady strength of love and responsibility, and the morning promised that the story was still moving forward. The rescue team worked with careful hands and steady voices, and the narrow opening grew a little wider as wooden supports were placed against the heavy rocks to keep the tunnel from closing again. Tom stayed near the opening and held a flashlight so Ron could see a soft glow, and that small light helped Ron keep his eyes open and his thoughts clear even as his body felt weak and tired. Ron listened to the sound of tools and quiet orders, and the slow scrape of stone being moved, and each sound felt like a promise that the world above had not forgotten him. Tom spoke to Ron often and asked simple questions about his family and his life, and his answers kept Ron awake and helped him push away the fear that tried to rise in his chest. Ron told Tom that he had grown up in a small house and that his mother worked long hours and that he once dreamed of helping people before business took over his days. Tom listened with care and shared that he had a young son named Ben, and that Ben liked drawing and building small houses out of old boxes, and that those small joys made every long workday worth it. The tunnel air grew warmer as more space opened, and the team placed a small air hose through the gap so Ron could breathe more easily, and he felt relief wash through him like a gentle tide. Ron closed his eyes for a moment, and felt the clean air fill his lungs, and he whispered thanks not to a name, but to the hands that kept working for him. Tom wiped dust from his face and kept moving stones and beams, and he did not think about how tired he was because he had learned long ago that a parent does not stop when there is still work to do. Outside the tunnel people gathered and watched, and some spoke quietly while others stood in silence, and many of them knew who Ron was, but all of them could see the quiet strength of the man digging. A medic crawled part way into the opening and checked Ron's pulse and spoke softly to him and told him to keep talking and to stay calm, and Ron nodded even though his head felt heavy. Ron looked through the gap and saw the blue sky, and it felt strange and beautiful after the long darkness, and he thought about how easy it was to forget the simple gift of light. Tom felt a small smile rise when Ron reacted to the sky because it meant the man was still with them and that hope had not faded. The rescue leader gave instructions, and the team moved as one, and they worked with ropes and boards and gentle pushes so the tunnel would stay safe as more weight was taken away. Ron began to feel pain in his legs, and he told Tom and the medic, and they adjusted his position slightly, and that small change eased the pressure just enough for him to relax a little. Tom kept his voice calm and strong, and he told Ron that he was doing well and that every minute brought him closer to the open air, and Ron believed him because Tom's voice did not carry doubt. As time passed, Ron shared more about his life and how he had built his company from nothing, and how he had lost touch with friends along the way, and how he now wished he had valued people more than numbers. Tom did not judge, and he simply listened and nodded, and sometimes said that it was never too late to change, and those words felt warm even in the cold mountain air. The crowd outside grew larger and cameras appeared, but the rescue leader asked for space and quiet, and most people respected that because the moment was too serious for noise. Ron heard distant sounds of people and knew the world was watching, but what mattered most to him was the man who stayed near the opening and spoke to him like a friend. Tom thought about Ben again, and imagined telling him this story one day, and he hoped it would teach Ben that courage was not loud but steady, and that real heroes kept going when it was hard. The rescue team removed a large slab of stone, and a bigger opening appeared, and sunlight poured in and touched Ron's face, and he blinked as if seeing the world for the first time. Tears formed in his eyes, and he did not hide them because he felt safe enough to let them fall. Tom saw the tears and felt a tightness in his own chest because he knew how close the man had been to losing everything and how small moments could change a whole life. The medic checked Ron again and said his signs were stable and that they would soon try to move him, and those words lifted the spirits of everyone nearby. Ron reached one hand through the opening, and Tom took it, and their hands met in a simple grip that said more than long speeches ever could. The rescue leader warned that the next step was delicate and that everyone must stay focused, and the team nodded and prepared their tools with care. Ron took slow breaths and listened to the calm voices around him, and he felt less alone than he had ever felt in his large, empty houses. Tom stayed close and kept holding Ron's hand, and he told him about Ben's drawings and how Ben liked to draw suns and mountains, and that made Ron smile because he was now looking at a real mountain again. As the team worked, Ron felt a strange mix of pain and hope, and he knew the process would not be easy, but he also knew he was not facing it alone. The mountain that had trapped him was now slowly giving him back, and that change felt like a quiet miracle. Tom thought about how a single choice to step forward had brought him into this moment, and he felt proud, not in a loud way but in a gentle way that warmed his heart. The opening grew wider, and more light filled the space, and the air felt fresh and clean, and Ron's thoughts became clearer as fear slowly lost its grip. The rescue leader signaled that they were close, and everyone moved with extra care and steady hands. Ron closed his eyes for a moment, and thanked the simple things like air and light, and the man who never stopped digging. The long night had turned into a bright morning, and even though the work was not finished yet, hope now filled the tunnel as strongly as the light. The rescue team moved slowly and carefully as the opening grew wider, and wooden supports held the heavy stones in place, and the mountain seemed to breathe again. Ron could now see more of the sky, and the bright blue above felt like a gift that he never thought he would receive again. Tom stayed close and kept talking in a calm voice so Ron would not feel afraid, and each word helped keep his mind steady. The medic prepared a soft board to slide under Ron and explained every step so Ron would know what was happening, and that gentle care made him feel respected. Ron felt pain in his legs and back, but he stayed strong because he trusted the hands that were working to save him. Tom held the flashlight and kept the beam steady so the medic and rescue team could see clearly inside the tight space. The crowd outside waited in quiet hope, and the mountain road felt still as if nature itself was watching the careful work. Ron remembered moments from his life when he had rushed and pushed and demanded quick results, and now he understood that some things could only be done with patience. Tom thought about Ben again and imagined how his son would smile if he saw how many people were working together to help one man. The rescue leader gave soft instructions, and the team adjusted the supports and pulled more stones away, and the opening grew large enough for the board to slide inside. Ron took a deep breath and nodded to show he was ready, and his eyes stayed on Tom because that steady presence gave him strength. The medic slid the board under Ron and asked him to keep still, and Ron did his best even as his body felt stiff and sore. Tom spoke gentle words and told Ron he was doing great, and those words helped him hold on. The team slowly lifted Ron onto the board, and every movement was slow and careful so nothing would shift or cause more harm. Ron felt a rush of air as his body moved, and he could now see more light and faces above him, and that made him feel less trapped. The crowd outside let out a soft sound of relief, but quickly returned to silence as the team continued their work. Tom stayed right beside Ron and kept his hand close so Ron would not feel alone. Ron looked at Tom and felt a deep sense of gratitude that went beyond money and status, and he knew this moment had changed him forever. The rescue team began to slide the board out of the tunnel, and the sunlight touched Ron's face again, and this time it felt warm and real. Ron blinked as the bright light filled his eyes, and he smiled in a weak but honest way. Tom felt a weight lift from his chest when he saw Ron coming out, and he whispered quiet thanks to the simple hope that kept them going. The medic checked Ron's breathing and pulse again, and nodded with calm approval. Ron was now half out of the tunnel, and the mountain behind him no longer felt like a prison, but like a place he had survived. Tom thought about how a single choice to help had led him here, and he felt proud that he had not walked away. The rescue leader told everyone to stay steady, and the team continued to pull the board inch by inch. Ron felt the rough ground beneath him change to open air, and he knew he was almost free. The crowd held their breath as Ron was gently pulled out of the tunnel and placed on a clear area of ground. Sunlight washed over him, and the sky looked wide and open and beautiful. Ron took a long breath of fresh air and felt tears rise in his eyes again. Tom stood nearby with dust on his clothes and sweat on his face, and he felt a deep sense of relief and joy. The medic placed a warm blanket over Ron and checked him carefully to make sure he was safe. Ron looked at Tom and reached out his hand, and Tom took it without hesitation. Their simple grip said more than any long speech could say. The crowd watched in quiet respect, and many people felt moved by the sight of a single dad and a saved man sharing such a real moment. Ron felt a strong urge to thank Tom, but his voice was still weak, so he simply squeezed Tom's hand and nodded. Tom smiled gently and told Ron that he was glad he was safe. The rescue team began to pack their tools, and the tension slowly faded from the air. Ron lay on the ground and looked at the clouds and felt as if he had been given a second chance at life. Tom thought about Ben and how he would tell him that helping others was always worth the effort. The mountain that had caused so much fear now stood quiet and still. Ron felt tired but peaceful, and he knew that this moment would stay with him forever. Tom stayed close until the medic said it was time to move Ron to an ambulance. Ron did not want Tom to leave, but he knew their paths would cross again in some way. The ambulance doors opened, and the team prepared to take Ron away for more care. Ron looked at Tom one more time and felt deep gratitude in his heart. Tom gave a small wave and wished him well. The long journey out of darkness had ended, and a new chapter was beginning for both of them. The ambulance drove away slowly as the mountain road cleared, and Ron lay inside wrapped in a warm blanket, while the soft sound of wheels on gravel filled the quiet air. Tom stood by the road and watched until the vehicle was out of sight and only dust and sunlight remained. He felt tired deep in his bones, but his heart was calm and full because he knew he had done the right thing. Tom returned to his small truck and sat for a moment with his hands resting on the wheel, and he took a long breath as the weight of the long night finally left him. His thoughts went back to Ben, and he smiled as he imagined his son running to meet him when he got home. Later that day, Ron arrived at a clean and quiet medical center where kind hands helped him and gentle voices told him that he was safe. He rested on a soft bed and looked out a window where sunlight touched green trees, and he felt amazed at how beautiful simple things could be. Ron thought about the tunnel and the dark and the fear, and then about Tom and his steady voice and his strong hands. He realized that in all his years of building tall towers, he had never built something as strong as the trust that grew between two people in a hard moment. As days passed, Ron slowly regained strength, and his mind stayed busy with thoughts of change and purpose. He asked the staff about Tom and learned about his life as a single dad who worked long hours to care for his son. Ron felt deep respect and a wish to honor the man who had helped save him. When Ron was well enough to walk, he asked to meet Tom, and arrangements were made. Tom arrived at the center wearing simple clothes and a shy smile, and he did not know what to expect. Ron saw him and felt a wave of warmth, and he stepped forward to greet him. They shared a quiet moment of eye contact that held all the memories of the tunnel and the long night. Ron thanked Tom in a soft but strong voice and told him that he would never forget what he had done. Tom listened and nodded and said he was just glad Ron was safe. They sat together and talked about Ben and about simple dreams and about the value of helping others. Ron felt more at peace in that small room than he ever had in large offices. After that meeting, Ron made a decision that would change many lives. He used his resources to support safety and care for workers in places like the mountain tunnel. He also created a small fund to help families like Tom and Ben so they could live with more comfort and less worry. Tom was surprised when Ron told him about this, and he felt grateful but also proud that his simple act had led to something good for many people. Back at home, Tom told Ben about the long night and the rescue, and Ben listened with wide eyes and a big smile. He hugged his father and said he was proud, and Tom felt a deep joy that no money could buy. Ron visited the mountain again later, and stood by the tunnel entrance, and felt a quiet respect for the place that had taught him so much. He remembered the darkness and the light and the hands that reached out to him. Tom continued his work and his life, but he carried a new sense of strength and purpose. He knew that even small people could make big changes when they chose to care. Ron and Tom stayed in touch, and their bond grew into a true friendship. They shared stories and laughter and moments of reflection. Ron often visited Tom and Ben and enjoyed simple meals and honest talks. He felt that these moments were the true treasures of life. The story of the tunnel spread and inspired others to step forward when someone needed help. People remembered that courage did not always wear a uniform or a badge. Sometimes it wore a dusty jacket and held a shovel. Tom felt humbled by the attention, but he stayed the same kind person he had always been. Ron stayed true to his promise to live with more care and kindness. Together they showed that even in the darkest places light could be found. Their journey began with a collapse, but it ended with hope and connection. The mountain stood silent as a witness to their story. And in the hearts of those who heard it, a gentle reminder lived on that every act of kindness matters.